Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mystery Rift. I'm David Paulides. We often talk about the lost in the wild, hikers, campers, hunters. But tonight, we are focusing on a group taught to survive the wilderness. Children whose very training was supposed to be their shield, the Boy Scouts of America. When an average person vanishes, we look at the elements. But when a trained scout disappears, we are forced to look at the impossible. How does a child, mere feet from his father, on a well-worn path, simply cease to exist? The cases you are about to hear aren't isolated accidents. They fit a terrifying profile, the very core of the missing 411 phenomenon. These boys didn't just get lost. They vanished. We begin in the rugged Uinta Mountains of Utah, August 2004. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley was on a scouting excursion with his troop. 18 boys and several adult chaperones, including his own father, Kevin. It was a Friday evening, around 8:00 p.m. Garrett had been fishing and gotten his pants and shoes wet. A simple, minor inconvenience. His father sent him back to camp to change. Listen closely to the distance. The camp was a quarter of a mile away, just 50 paces from the fishing spot. The trail was well traveled, well established, and very easy to navigate. There was no reason for concern at all. Garrett, a trained Boy Scout, was confident. His father wasn't worried. But Garrett never made it back. Did he feel a presence watching him from the trees? When Kevin realized the boy was gone, he frantically retraced the short trail. He searched for any sign of his son. He even reported thinking he heard his son calling, screaming, "Dad!" But the source of the yelling was never, ever found. Hundreds of searchers descended on the area immediately. For days, nothing was discovered in the deep forest. Then, 5 days later, a single agonizing piece of evidence emerged, a Nike brand sock. It was wadded up, found in a remote boulder field, a full half-mile from where he was last seen. This is a classic missing 411 profile point alone for a brief period, near safety. But traveling a distance over difficult terrain, resulting in a discarded piece of clothing. Why remove a sock only half a mile from camp in freezing temperatures? The official theory suggested he sought shelter from the 18-degree Fahrenheit overnight chill. But why was there no other sign? No tracks leading up to the sock, no sign of a struggle, no indication he was running. The search was eventually scaled back and then stopped entirely. A young boy on an easy errand near his father was swallowed by the high country. He simply disappeared into thin air. Our next case takes us to Iowa. Back in February 1973, the weather was immediately suspicious. 11-year-old Guy Heckle, Troop 101, was camping by the Cedar River when something unexplainable happened. The troop was playing a classic game, Capture the Flag. At 8:00 p.m., Guy was last seen running around with his friends under the cover of a cold, moonless night. When the adults checked the beds later that night, Guy was discovered to be gone. The search began immediately in the freezing weather, and shortly after the boy was reported missing. Snow began to fall heavily. This is another factor frequently observed in these vanishings, as if the environment itself conspires to impede any recovery efforts. The next day, the single piece of evidence that tragically mirrors Garrett's sock guys, light blue. Quilted parka, found by a searcher. It was quickly identified by his mother. Crucially, it was still zipped at the bottom. If he fell into the icy river, why was his jacket zipped? If he was forcibly taken, why was the jacket left behind so neatly? His family suspected foul play, an abduction carried out with frightening efficiency. But every single troop member and chaperone cooperated fully with police. No links were ever established between them and the boy's disappearance. Just like Garrett Bardsley, an immediate, unexplainable disappearance with only a piece of clothing left behind. The boy's body was never recovered. We move now to the high granite formations of Mount San Gorgonio in California. The tallest peak in Southern California, July 1991. This peak seems to be a magnet for these kinds of cases. 12-year-old Jared Negretti was on his first overnight backpacking trip to the summit. The troop, led by Dennis Knight, was hiking around 600 p.m. Jared reportedly fell behind the pack. Some reports claim he was simply tired and told to wait by the trail. The troop made camp, realized Jared was not with them, and raised the alarm. A massive, exhaustive search followed 16 days. 40,000 man-hours were spent searching the thick forest. The searchers found his backpack. They also found candy and beef jerky wrappers and faint footprints from his shoes. All clues seemingly pointing to a trail that suddenly and impossibly led nowhere. Jared seemed to have walked right out of his own shoes. But the area yielded other anomalies that greatly complicate the narrative. A classic hallmark of these deep wilderness cases, they found a microwave oven, cannabis plants, and a wallet containing $130. None of this belonged to Jared. What were these bizarre items doing abandoned in the remote national forest? Who were the previous inhabitants of this mysterious area? And was Jared running from them when he disappeared? Then, the camera. Jared's camera was found, and one photo is truly unsettling. A dark image that shows his eyes and nose with a strange blur in the background. Police dismissed it as a simple flash anomaly. But to the family and to anyone who studies these cases, the image screams of disorientation, of confusion, and perhaps of something else unseen, lurking just out of frame. The boy was near a granite formation on a mountain. He was trained, and he still vanished without a discernible track or struggle. Not all disappearances involve silent, empty woods. Some involve the raw, unforgiving power of nature itself. But with an inexplicable twist we must examine closely. September 1961. 17-year-old Alvin Nelson was hiking the canyons of Zion National Park's Narrows. A beautiful but often dangerous location. A massive, sudden flash flood swept through the canyon. 5 people were lost that day. including Alvin and his best friend, Frank Johnson. The immediate presumption was that they were swept away and buried under decades of silt and rock. But while Zion National Park later became highly efficient at recovering all other drowning victims, Alvin and Frank were never found. This is a case of non-recovery. It wasn't until 51 years later, in 2006, that an answer finally surfaced. A swimmer in the Virginia River found a skull fragment. The fragment was incredibly small and water-worn. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, authorities were able to match the fragment to Alvin Nelson. His sister, Dor Lee, finally received that small piece of definitive proof in a case that had long been filed as just an environmental death. What an impossible length of time to wait for a sliver of an answer. But what about the rest of them? What about Frank Johnson? When the environment consumes these boys, why is it that in these specific cases, the remains are often scattered or incredibly difficult to find? Sometimes turning up in locations that defy the initial search grid. These are 4 stories spanning 4 decades. 4 different states, and 4 seemingly different circumstances. Yet, they all share common chilling threads that define the missing 411 profile. They were Boy Scouts, trained for the outdoors, yet they vanish instantly. All 4 boys went missing in the late afternoon or early evening, a common profile time for these unexplained incidents. Then there is the boulder, water, or granite connection. Bardsley near a boulder field and water. Heckle near the river and snow. Negrete on a granite mountain. Nelson in a water-carved canyon. Boulder fields and water are overwhelmingly present in these clusters. And finally, the partial recovery. A zipped parka, a discarded sock, a single skull fragment. The wilderness takes most of the evidence, leaving behind only these frustrating partial clues that raise more questions than answers. These boys were not victims of simple accidents, or at least not accidents as we understand them. They were victims of an unexplained phenomenon that operates with frightening precision in our national parks and wilderness areas. Why do the disappearances cluster in specific geographic areas? Why the strange weather? Why the sudden vanishing of a person trained to survive, often just steps away from their group? The fact remains, the wilderness holds secrets. And in these cases, the answers are more unsettling than any rational explanation we can offer. I am David Paulides, and thank you for joining me on Mystery Rift. Until next time, stay safe, and be aware of what lurks off the grid.